This day in sports history. It's March 17th, and on this day in 1973, the Philadelphia 76ers set a record for futility and kept right on going. If you happened to be living in the Philadelphia area in 1972, you might have come across a want ad in the Philadelphia Inquirer. Wanted. One head basketball coach to coach the local professional basketball team. No NBA experience required. Salary negotiable. Now, understand, they did not start looking for a coach with this ad in the newspaper. They had talked to a lot of folks to replace Dr. Jack Ramsey, who had moved on to coach the Buffalo Braves. It's just that nobody really wanted the job. The team was a hot mess, and it was obvious the team was a spark away from a complete dumpster fire. So, getting a little desperate, the Sixers management had put the ad in the Inquirer. They got a response that said, hey, you should look at this guy, Roy Rubin, coaching up in New York at Long Island University. He'd been a successful high school coach, and in 11 seasons at LIU, a D2 school, he had a respectable 174-94 record. The Sixers talked to Rubin soon after and offered him the job. It became obvious fairly early on in the 72-73 season that Rubin was in way over his head. He was a nice guy with no idea what to do with a pro basketball team. Sort of like a 70s version of Ted Lasso. How did the Sixers get here? They'd won an NBA title as recently as 1967, winning 68 games that season. The decline began in July of '68 when the Sixers traded Wilt Chamberlain to the Lakers. The relationship between Wilt and owner Irving Kosloff had deteriorated over a scuttled promise. Then, Chet Walker, another future NBA Hall of Famer, was traded to the Chicago Bulls. And then, the day Philly hired Rubin, the best player remaining on the roster, Billy Cunningham, bolted for the Carolina Cougars of the ABA. The season started off horribly for the Sixers, losing their first 15 games. When they finally won their first against the Houston Rockets more than a month into the season, Rubin leaped off the bench with such joy and excitement that he injured himself, snapping his hamstring, and he needed a few of his players to carry him back to the locker room. Another interesting story from that year, the Sixers had a player named John Trapp, who had come over in the Wilt trade, and Trapp had some success with the Lakers, but he could also be a bit of a problem. Well, in one game, Rubin sent a player to the scorer's table to sub in for Trapp. He'd only been on the court for a few minutes, and when Trapp saw the man was coming in for him, he gestured to a friend of his sitting behind the 76ers bench. Coach Rubin was interested in just exactly who he was communicating with, so he looked in that direction to see that Trapp was pointing to a friend, who then pushed aside his coat to reveal a handgun as he shook his head from side to side. Trapp stayed in the game. After 51 games and the team had just 4 wins, Rubin was fired and replaced by Kevin Lockery as player coach. Now, can you imagine getting traded to this team mid-season? Well, that was the fate of Kevin Van Arsdale, who was brought into Sixers purgatory 2 games into the Lockery stint. He said the team was like a car that was a burnt, faded, broken down, used lemon with a sticker price so low it was almost offensive. Philly lost the first 11 under Lockery before showing a little pulse of life with 5 wins in the following 7 games. Alas, it was like the film Awakenings, when De Niro is brought out of his catatonic state for a brief time, only to revert back by the end of the movie. Well, yeah, that's what happened. The Sixers went back to losing. Well, on this night, the 76ers were at home against the Baltimore Bullets. They'd tied the NBA record of 67 losses held by the 68 San Diego Rockets and the 71 Cleveland Cavaliers 3 nights before. For most of the first half, Philadelphia led. Fred Carter was scoring buckets from all spots on the floor in a desperate and prideful attempt to keep from going down in the record book, at least on this night. Carter poured in 39 points, too shy of his career best, but it just wasn't enough to stave off the inevitable. Baltimore's Elvin Hayes was also determined. With the game tied at 115, Hayes took over, scoring the final 5 points of the game and finishing with his season high of 43 and a 120-115 win for the Bullets. The 76ers set the record for most losses in a season, but they were not quite done yet. They lost their final 5 after that to end the year of futility with a 9-73 record. The 73-loss season has been challenged most recently by the 2016 Sixers, but still remains alone at the top of the list.
And that's the end of the first half. As the teams head to the locker room, the Spartans lead the Bulldogs by a score.
You guys stink.
Geez, Coach, we're only down a couple of points.
No, I mean you guys really smell. You need to hit the showers. And here, I got every one of you new bars of soap from the Sterling Soap Company. Each bar is artisan crafted using natural ingredients and essential oils. They also have shave soaps, colognes, beard balm, and a whole lot more. Now get in there.
But Coach, we have another half to play.
I don't care. I can't stand to be around you.
A few minutes later.
All right, bring it in tight. You guys are still playing terrible, but you're smelling great out there. Now listen, you're going to need to stock up for the rest of the season. We got a lot of tough games left. So go to sterlingsoap.com after the game. That's STIRLING soap.com. You got that?
Yes, Coach.
Great. sterlingsoap.com on 3. 1, 2, 3.
sterlingsoap.com.
With any sport, there are improvements made to make the game more fair or watchable or enjoyable, maybe safer. Well, in basketball, improvements were made early on. The invention of the dribble was one of those. It took nearly a decade for someone to figure out that cutting a hole in the peach basket would be a good idea. But things continued to get better. And I've talked about others here, like the addition of the shot clock and the three-point line. Well, on this day in 1937, it was one of those good-for-the-game improvements. The center jump after every basket was eliminated. Yep, there was a time that after every made basket, the teams would return to center court and the ball would be lofted in the air for two tall dudes to battle for the next possession. This rule was changed because, well, teams were stacking their lineup with taller and taller players in an effort to win the persistent jump balls. So, basketball's National Rules Committee approved a recommendation by the National Coaches Association to eliminate the jump ball after every made bucket. Instead, the jump ball would only be used to start the game and at the start of overtime. They agreed to a one-year trial, but of course it was an overwhelming favorite of coaches everywhere, and possession out of bounds after a made shot became the permanent rule. On this day in 1955, a riot broke out at the Montreal Forum during a game between the Canadiens and the Detroit Red Wings. But it wasn't because of what was happening on the ice. The riot was in protest of the Montreal Canadiens' Maurice the Rocket Richard's suspension for the remainder of the season, including the playoffs, by NHL President Clarence Campbell. The announcement of Richard's season-ending suspension had been made the day prior by Campbell, and the incident leading to that decision happened on the 13th. So let's rewind back 4 days. With 4 games left in the regular season, Montreal was in Boston playing the Bruins. At the 14-minute mark of the third period, with the Bruins up 4-2, a fight broke out. Actually, it may be better to call it a brawl. After a face-off, Richard went after Hal Laycoe, pushing him to the ice. Laycoe raised his stick and grazed the top of Richard's head, causing a gash in his scalp. After a few seconds, Richard realized that he was bleeding from the hit that he took from Laycoe's stick, and he went after Laycoe again. Before he could get to him, though, linesman Cliff Thompson grabbed Richard and held him back. But essentially, it opened Richard up for punches being thrown by Laycoe. After absorbing a few of those punches, Richard escaped the hold and landed 2 punches to the face of Thompson, the linesman. After tempers cooled, Richard was taken to a local Boston hospital and treated for the gash on his head, which required 5 stitches to close the wound. Now, to understand this fight a little more in the context of today's game, there is a well-known Richard quote from after his time on the ice in which he said, "If you know anything else about the time I played, know about how violent was the game." Richard was summoned to Campbell's office located in the Sun Life building in Montreal for a meeting about the incident. Leko was also there. In essence, this was a hearing. Leko told his side of the story and claimed that Richard was coming at him with a 2-handed raised stick before Thompson intervened. After the hearing on the 16th, Commissioner Campbell suspended Richard for the remaining 3 games of the regular season and the playoffs. Richard had been leading the NHL in points that season prior to his suspension, and most certainly would have won it with 3 games to play, a title he had never won and he wanted badly. Now, to further understand the riot that happened on this night, you have to understand a little bit more about the politics going on in Montreal at this time. And apologies, this is a very condensed version, but here you go. Richard was the hero of Montreal. He was a French-Canadian, playing in a very proud French-speaking Quebec, but one that was ruled by a wealthy Anglo elite. There was a lot of resentment bubbling at the surface between the ruling English and the French Canadians, who felt like second-class citizens. Campbell was an English war hero who had fined Richard for several incidents already, but had not fined others involved in those same incidents. There were many who believed Campbell's bias against the French in general, and Richard in particular, led to unfair punishment. In fact, prior to all of this, Richard wrote a column in a Montreal paper where he called Campbell a tyrant and said he was running a dictatorship. Campbell stepped in and stopped him from writing any more columns in the paper. So now, with Campbell issuing the suspension, Detroit was in town to play Montreal on this night. There were protests on the sidewalks and in the streets outside the Forum prior to the game. Campbell, in an act of defiance, decided to go to the game that night and sit in the crowd. However, he did not arrive until 5 minutes after the game had started. Now, Campbell was a military man who was never late for anything. His showing up after the game had started brought all the attention to him as he proudly sat down in his seats. It did not take long for things to get heated. One of the refs that night was Red Story, and he said things could have and should have been a lot different that night.
You knew something was going to happen, but you didn't know what. And Campbell should not have been at the game. And if he had not been at the game, we would have had no riot. But he dared the public.
A few fans had brought tomatoes, and they started to throw them at Campbell. Well, one fan got close enough to Campbell to smack him in the face before he could be pulled away by police officers. A fan with a tomato also got close, crushed it in his hand, and smeared it on Campbell's suit. Then, in the tunnel leading to the locker rooms, a fan released a homemade tear gas canister, and yellow smoke began to fill the arena. The Richard Riot was underway, and it spilled out into the streets. Jules Belanger was at the Montreal Forum that night and remembers it all too well.
That bomb, that tear gas bomb exploded in the exit. Everybody got scared and the Forum went empty. So you had 15, 16,000 people all of a sudden in the street at the same time.
The game was called and the Red Wings were awarded the win. Thousands outside the Forum overturned cars, lit them on fire, windows were broken, and shots were fired into the air. The riot raged for more than 7 hours. Damage to property in the city was estimated to be around $100,000. 33 people were injured, including 8 police officers, and more than 100 were arrested. Some were fined, and more than 60 were indicted. There was a worry that once night fell on the 18th, the riots would start back up. Police pleaded with Richard for help. The Rocket went on the radio, asking those around the city to stop rioting and settle down. They listened, and there was no more violence. He also said that he would take his punishment and come back the next year and deliver a Stanley Cup to Montreal. He was good on his promise, but he didn't deliver just one. Instead, he led the Canadiens to 5 consecutive Stanley Cup titles from 1956 through 1960. And on this day in 1897, it was a boxing match between Robert Fitzsimmons and James J. Corbett. Who, you may be asking? But this is one of the all-time great fights, and it's known by 2 words: Solar Plexus. Corbett was the champion at the time after beating John L. Sullivan. That name you know if A, you're a boxing fan, or B, you're a Dish fan, and remember the March 10th edition. But Corbett had gone into a sort of semi-retirement, choosing the stage instead of the ring after his win over Sullivan. The other fighter, Fitzsimmons, was called the Blacksmith, and if you've ever said the bigger they are, the harder they fall, well, you can thank the undersized Fitzsimmons for that line, because he is the one who coined it. He stalked Sullivan and actually got him to put up money to defend the title, but boxing was not legal everywhere in the States at that point. Attempts at fights in Dallas, Texas, and Hot Springs, Arkansas fell through because of laws against prize fighting. But finally, they were able to ink a deal to meet on this day in Carson City, Nevada for a $15,000 purse and a $2,500 side bet between the 2 fighters for a fight to the finish. Men in town started working immediately on the first open-air arena built specifically for boxing. Finally, on this day, the pugilists outfitted with gloves took to the ring. Corbett controlled the early rounds. The 6th round was when the fight turned, though. Corbett put Fitzsimmons on the mat, and he stayed there for 6 seconds. But Fitzsimmons was able to get back to his feet, and from that point, Fitzsimmons rallied and turned the tables. In the 14th round, Fitzsimmons absorbed a series of Corbett punches and then countered. After one series opened his opponent up, Fitzsimmons landed a blow to Corbett's midsection, aka his solar plexus, putting him on the mat, which he did not recover from. The last great fight of the 19th century had come to an end with a new champion. One more interesting thing about this fight was that it was the first boxing match that was ever filmed. Enoch Rector climbed inside a huge human-powered camera box called a Veriscope. He captured on film the introduction of the fighters, all 14 of the rounds, and there is a 3-minute film that still exists in the Library of Congress archives, and it is viewable online. And time now for today's That's Got Nothing to Do with Sports fun fact. In 1947, General Mills cereal included an atomic bomb ring as a toy prize in boxes of Kix cereal.
What did you say?
The ring contained a tiny amount of polonium-210, and looking through a small aperture in the ring holder could see flashes of light as alpha particles hit a tiny zinc background. The company assured parents it was safe, and with a half-life of about 140 days, any atomic bomb rings still in existence today would truly be safe. This has been an original Thrive Suite production.